Greetings and welcome to Aspects of Aliyah. I take this opportunity to wish you and yours all of God's blessings and peace in the year of 2025. Today, I greet you from the snowbound United Kingdom with sub-zero temperatures. However, that shouldn't deter us from the great warmth and love of the Kingdom of God. We're starting a series, commencing now, on a history of Israel. Now, we're not going to do this in what I call the traditional manner. Not going to do this in a chalkboardy or even a particularly lectury kind of way, just by regurgitating facts from history or Bible verses or things like this. We're going to look at the whole counsel of God concerning the three-stranded cord concerning Israel, which is, of course, God, land, and people. So the history of Israel commences on the opening pages of the canonical scriptures. But before we actually start, I'm going to take this first session to explain or amplify or describe how we're going to come to the conclusions that we share as we proceed from the next session. Now, it may come as a surprise to many of you that there are at least 900 versions or editions of the Bible in English. In the English language, 900. Now, some of these are translations. Some, probably the majority, are actually paraphrases. That is, they are not direct translations. They are the same content but put in different words, different language, if you like. Different idioms are used, or reduced vocabularies, or even expanded vocabularies are employed in paraphrases. The idea being to make the content of the text or text readily understandable to the audience. That is to say, the people who are reading them. 900 of these. Some good, many are appalling, and we've even got John Smith's so-called translation of the Bible, although the Latter-day Saints more recently have decided to call it a revision. And there are many, many revisions of scriptures. The Bible, as we read it, can seem very difficult. If we read different kind of versions, might even seem contradictory at the time, and that is because the editing boards very often have got their own doctrinal positions that they wish to support or defend. So before we get into the ins and outs of these kind of things, I'm just going to share with you the way that we will be approaching this and the documents we will use. But let me say, very first of all, there is always a problem with an English Bible because it is a translation of a translation of a translation, or maybe more than that. Let's just think about this. You've got the Hebrew Bible, then you've got the Septuagint, that's a Greek version, which we'll talk about shortly, which is translation from Hebrew, and then that's translated into English. Difficult, isn't it? A translation of a translation of a translation. And the attendant problems come with this, because not all Hebrew or Greek words have precise equivalents in English. We're very unaware, or the translation board are very unaware of idioms that are being used. The reader is obviously very unaware about the religious and social conventions of the time, particularly the societal ones. There is no recognition of the repertoire of appropriation of the initial audience, that is, those that first heard the word. All biblical texts, even letters, start out as oral transmissions. And particularly concerning letters in the ancient world were very short, average of 89 words. The great orators, Seneca, Cicero, people like that, managed around about 200, 300. One of the longest letters from this time was 790 words. However, the world record for a letter is 11,777, give or take a word here or there. And guess what? That is actually by Paul. And it is the letter to the Romans. And that was written by a man who were atheists. The people who wrote letters didn't write them themselves. They had professional to write them. People such as Tertius, Silas, Timothy, just to name all three. So this is really the background to the things that we're reading today. So what we're going to do is we are actually not going to just look at the text of a English Bible. We are going to present our text from a combination of these following documents. And for the Hebrew text, we're going to use the Leningrad Codex, which dates from 11th, 12th century, which is a Masoretic text. That is a text with all the little dots and squiggles on it, but also the text has got notes in the vertical and horizontal margins to help with the cantillation and so on. Please remember that because literacy was extremely low, 6% in the ancient world, and that was the property of the educated elite, in other words, religious and governmental officials, and a small amount of what we today might term scholars. So we'll be using the Hebrew text using Leningrad Codex. The next development in the Hebrew Bible, I don't like the expression Old Testament because there's nothing old about it. After the exiles, the Hebrew language had been lost to the general public, although it always remained as the language of faith and devotion. Following the return from the exile, we saw the emergence of the synagogue. In the synagogue and other places, the Hebrew scriptures were read and then were translated into Aramaic with comment or explanations by an official who rejoiced in this rather wonderful name of the Atar Turguman. And we have two records of these teachings, which are known as Targumim in Hebrew. Targon Onkelos and Targon Yonatan, or more strictly speaking, Pseudo Yonatan. So we can explore these to understand what people were understanding before there was what we might loosely term a canon. Following the time of the return, we're told, it's related, that there was a great assembly where leading scholars, leaders if you like, got together to decide which scriptures were the ones that were important and should be transmitted and used as part of their religious practice. If we move along from there, we're going to look at how the text was transmitted. Well, there was Paleo Hebrew to start with, then there was Hebrew without the consonants and so on, and then, as I said, we moved from there to the Masoretic text. The Masoretes were from two families, Ben Naphtali and Ben Asher, and it says that the preparation of the Masoretic text started round about the year 600 of the Common Era and took between 300 and 350 years to complete. Quite an endeavour. But even though the Masoretes admitted themselves, not every text they got was pure, unadulterated, because several got alterations or the redacted versions and so on. So these families spent their lifetimes, generations, preparing this text in order that it might be pronounced correctly. And the endeavour that went to this is really quite remarkable. There were many, many elements that were strict rules. We haven't really got time to look at them all, but I'll just share the two of them with you. It had to be on the skin of the obviously kosher animal, had to be written in black ink. Here's an interesting one for you. Every time the name of the Lord was written down, now that could be El Elyon, Adonai, could be one of the many titles of God. Couldn't it? Yahweh, Roy, El Shaddai. I mean, we can go on this massive. But if there was, every time that name was written, they had to take a ritual bath. And I was just reading just very quickly through a list of just the titles of the name of God when he's like appears. I mean, they must have spent at least half that time in the bath. I'm not being flippant about this, but they were so dedicated. Of course, there weren't any mistakes allowed. If there was a mistake, the whole scroll had to be destroyed. And there were very strict rules about how many lines in a column, how many columns, and so on. It was a massive, massive undertaking. So we need to be very thankful to the Masoretes for the Masoretic text of the Tanakh. So we move on to the next great event, which is production of the Septuagint, 70. If you see it written down in any of my books or in other things, it's written down as LXX, usually. Capital L, capital X, X. Of course, it's a Roman numeral, aren't they? 70. And tradition has it that the request made to the ruler to have translation of the Hebrew scriptures into Greek for the Jews who were domiciled in Alexandria, which of course, as I'm sure you know, is in Egypt, but the lingua franca of the time of the ancient Near East was Greek, of the Koine version. Tradition says that it took 70 scholars 70 days to do this, and there's all kinds of wonderful stories about this. We won't detain ourselves on that, but you can read about it in my forthcoming work towards the theology of Israel that should be published sometime in the next 3 months. Big hefty volume, probably about 900 to 1,000 pages, but if you've got the time and the patience, a lot of the things that we speak about really are expanded greatly, he said with an unashamed plug. So we'll take a quick break and come back to the Septuagint.
If you are a Christian, then there is no question that you owe a great debt to the Jewish people. Unto them were entrusted the oracles of God. What does that mean? It means, if not for the faithfulness of the Jewish people, we would not have this. And therefore you would not know your God, and you would not know his Son.
Israel and the Jewish people are under attack right now, and we owe them everything. The least that we can do is support them in their hour of need. So please go to EzraInternational.org and give to the Emergency Relief Fund, and your dollars will be used to help displaced and traumatized Jewish people throughout the land.
And remember, if you do nothing, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jewish people from another place. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Please go to EzraInternational.org and give your best gift today.
Welcome back. So we've looked at the Hebrew text of the scriptures. We've explained what the Targums are. We've explained about the moves towards a canon. We've spoken about the Septuagint. Now, it's very important, the Septuagint, because that was the scriptures that were employed in the New Testament. In the New Testament, the quotes are from the Septuagint and not from the Hebrew Bible. And there are some differences. Some people think some are important. Most people are slightly unconcerned about it. But it's sufficient to say that is where the scriptures are quoted from. They're quoted from the Greek Tanakh and not from the original Hebrew, so to speak. In between the New Testament, of course, the Dead Sea Scrolls were written, and as you know, they were found in the 20th century, and that caused a great mountain rejoicing. As of today, some of them have still not been decoded, or there wasn't technology to not destroy them if you're attempting to read them, but that seems to have been overcome lately, for which we rejoice greatly. And the great thing is that, in particular, the very important prophetic works, such as Isaiah and so on, most of those documents, if you want to call them that, in the completed form, are there, or at least in part there, or may have been whole but are damaged. Also, there's some very good pesharim. Pesher is similar to a commentary, something like that. So the Dead Sea Scrolls. So when we're looking at preparing a piece to teach on, they're going to look at the Hebrew scriptures, we're going to look at the Greek scriptures, we're going to see if that's confirmed or any nuances on that within the Dead Sea Scrolls. But also, there's a lot of writings, a lot of Jewish writings in what is called the Second Temple period. And that is from the year approximately 400, when the canon of the Tanakh, Old Testament, closes and supposedly prophecy ends, and the time of the destruction of the temple in the year 70 of the Common Era. And in that period, we get some of the books that appear in the Apocrypha, such as the books of Maccabees, etc. And not only those, there's a multitude of other writings. We won't go into them with great necessity. Many scholars feel that the books of Enoch should be part of the canon, but they're not, unless the canon gets revised at some time, which many academics feel maybe it should be. That's probably an in-house kind of argument, if you want. But sufficient to say, there are a lot of references in the New Testament that come from these writings. Now, as we're moving towards the New Testament, we use, when I say we, I'm talking about the we, myself, anybody that's part of our group listening, and so on. We're using the Nova Testamentum Graece Greek New Testament by Nestle and Aland, which is generally considered to be the best. In this, I have noted there are at least 176 references to non-canonical works written between 400, but mostly between 200 and the time of Yeshua. These are quoted. The Book of Jude is probably the most obvious one, which of course did cause some consternation when the Christian canon was being written. Likewise, Revelation. And I could go on, but that's a completely other subject. So we have round about the same time as New Testament's been prepared, and a reasonable assumption for the New Testament is that all the writings were there, possibly not in the final edition, if you like, but certainly were all there before the fall of the temple in the year 70 CE, simply because, with it being the centre of Judaic faith and Yeshua's prophecies about it falling, it certainly would have been mentioned. It certainly would not have been edited out. That would have been an impossibility. So we're going to take that. But round about the same time appears, very importantly, the Samaritan Pentateuch. Let me say that again. The Samaritan Pentateuch. That is the Samaritan version of at least the first 5 books of Moses. Why do we say the books of Moses? Because many scholars feel that they were written later, following the exile. Could Moses possibly have written these? The Samaritans are certainly very short of it. Well, if we look at the date of the Exodus, which I think we can maintain realistically, was 1445, before the Common Era. Writing, certainly, there was an alphabetical form of writing. Moses was brought up in the royal palace and therefore would have been highly educated and certainly would have been able to write. So the Torah not just passed down in oral form, but passed down in various written sources. Big stones too heavy to carry around, wax tablets melt, but papyrus or even leather skins perish. So if Moses did write it, there probably was in existence for many years an original source of the Pentateuch. So bearing that in mind, the Samaritan Pentateuch, if you can read it in Aramaic, which is not too dissimilar to Hebrew, it's worth having a look at that. In addition, we have the Peshitta, which is a Syriac version, written in Syriac, which is in the process of having an English edition now. A lot of it's available. You can get hold of it on the internet in bits and pieces if you want to have a look. But I've tried my best with most biblical language, but Syriac, I'm afraid, is a bit beyond me. Just quickly, and by the way, if you want to read the Septuagint version of the Tanakh, it is available on Net, which is a new English translation of the Septuagint. Nets, Nets, all capital letters, and you can get a free copy or parts of it or wherever you want if you're interested on the internet. So we have all these great wealth of sources to work from. Let me just run through them again, if I may. We have the Hebrew Bible, which we can look at the non-consonantal text, but that's difficult because unless we are very used to what I'm going to call audio-visual cognizance, it's difficult. Most Hebrew words are 3 consonants, and you put the vowels in where they fit, and it can change the meaning of the word phenomenally, and I mean phenomenally. So that's why the Masoretic text was always needed, even though it took all those years. It is so, however, that probably going back into the Second Temple period, there were some instructions of type that went along with the scriptures, because remember that in Judaism, scriptures are not read quietly or not spoken, they are cantillated. Some chanted, I prefer cantillation, but so it was important that these things were translated properly. So there we go. Hebrew Bible, Targums, the Great Assembly, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Second Temple writings, the Samaritan Pentateuch, the New Testament, the Peshitta, and so on. So we've got, as well as these, we've also got some other things. There are some Ethiopic writings as well, but very ancient. But for our purposes, we'll be using all of these. Yeah, in brief, the Tanakh and everything that goes with it, the intertestamental period and everything that goes with it, and the non-canonical New Testament writings. I'll just finally add, in the non-canonical New Testament writings, which were very influential, it was really not until the time of the later patristic period, and particularly when Constantine nationalised Christianity, that a lot of these writings that I'm speaking about, the non-canonical New Testament writings, were suddenly declared to be heretical because they didn't suit what I'm going to call the proto-Orthodox Church. They gained recognition under Constantine and changed the whole face of history. Also changed the whole face of biblical understanding when the early church fathers brought in allegorical interpretations and typology and Greek philosophy and much of the Hebrew understanding of the scriptures, not just in the Torah, not just in the Hebrew Bible, Septuagint, New Testament originally, and so on, became declared by people such as Epiphanius in particular, Eusebius, as being heretical works. One that might interest you was the Gospel of Thomas was very highly regarded by the very early church fathers, declared to be heretical. When the great Alexandria burnt down, it's thought that all evidences had got lost or burned deliberately. However, when the Nag Hammadi texts were discovered following the war, many of these books that were thought to have been totally destroyed were found. And there would have been more, but the nomadic people who found them were actually used, these codexes as they're called, were being used as fuel for the fires until they were rescued. However, the Gospel of Thomas was discovered there, and apart from 5, what's called a graphia, all the sayings of Jesus actually were incorporated in there. So, just interesting. So we might reference one or two of these things as we go along. So, welcome to the history of Israel. And I hope you're looking forward to this as much as I am. And we're going to start right in Genesis. Going to start right at the very beginning and look at this wonderful history of Israel. The history of Israel is not history of Israel if it's not God, land, people. Not events, times, dates, God, land, and people. So, once again, blessings for the new year, and God be with you until we meet again.